Welcome back, everybody. It is episode 82, and it has been a huge week in the United States with the election this past week. We talk about that and the implications it has for business and e-commerce and consumer. You're not going to want to miss this one, so buckle up. Special thanks to all of our sponsors, Fulfill, Northbeam, and Postscript. Here we go.
It's so easy to talk about, like, how hard it is to build, like, proper ERP.
It's such a conundrum too because usually implementing an ERP is so difficult. We're starting a new vertical, and as we're starting it, one of the questions we're asking at the beginning actually is when do we need to integrate with an ERP? When do we need to start thinking this way? Because it was so incredibly painful when we finally did it with Simple Modern. And so usually the integrations on these things are just an absolute bear because like you said, Matt, it's just a mess usually.
Well, it's also the funny thing is, there's been multiple times in our business history where we actually weigh the decision of do something based on the level of difficulty to make it work with existing integrations. Where it's
That's where it's really
isn't that
frustrating
stupid?
when accounting is stopping you from selling things.
Yeah.
And those are the things that'll just drive you crazy as an entrepreneur.
I have literally lost my shit because of this type of stuff. We're sorry, we're not doing it for what reason? It's like, "Oh, it's because integrations is gonna take forever." I'm like, "This is why I don't wanna own a company anymore."
Yeah. So what do you guys think the highest score you could give to a NetSuite is? I think both you guys are on NetSuite. What's the highest score you could possibly give them? 1 to 5.
1 to 5?
It's really hard to get above probably the high threes, 3
Yeah,
point something. The other problem with it, Sean, is that like, you can't just implement NetSuite usually. You have to go and get all of these extra contractors. There's this entire ecosystem of people around NetSuite just to help build integrations. And the problem with that is that the mileage really varies there and the quality level really varies there. That was actually where we had some of our problem is that we
yeah.
hired a contractor and we spent a whole bunch of money. They were supposed to be building integrations only for us to get integrations that sucked where we had to go back and redo them ourselves internally over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So it's not even just the NetSuite thing, although like I'm not like going to give it a 5 out of 5 or anything, but it's so complicated and you need so many other contractors that really drags down the score as well.
I think it's like uh, I think it's ERP is like telcos, Sean. Like, they're basically in the business of managing dissatisfaction because 'cause they're all so difficult to use.
Yeah, like, so famously, what Matt's referencing is that, Comcast has, like 10% of people like Comcast, yet it's a $100 billion a year business, right? It's
Right.
because like, it's
Like, you just
it's
nobody likes their telco provider. Like, when was the last time you're like, "Man, I love AT&T. What a great day to be on AT&T."
right. So
Said nobody.
So I we just released Sean's vendor list where I give 1 to 5 scores to everyone that we currently engage with. Fulfill, my ERP of choice, I give them a 4 out of 5 stars, and they were like, if you do not know about ERPs, maybe that you'd be bummed out by getting a 4 out of 5 stars.
That's an incredible score.
Yeah, I think the theoretical limit for an ERP should be a 3. Nobody is happy with it. It is like going to the dentist. That's
Yeah.
the it's like even if you have the best dentist on earth, even if they're so kind and so sweet, they're still gonna put a drill in your mouth. You know what I mean? Like that is the ERP business. So if you're looking for a 4 out of 5 ERP, which if you grade on a curve is like a 1 billion out of 10 ERP, check out Fulfill.
So it's Monday, the week after election. So by the time this gets released, we're long after the election results. Let's forget the election results and let's just like and why and whatever, just put all that crap aside. Mike, you just got back from China. Sean, you think about this all the time. What what does this outcome mean in the world of consumer to you guys? I don't know who wants to go first. Like, Mike, maybe start with your trip to China. What was everybody talking about? Like, just lay it on us.
First, it matters. it is going to be a pretty consequential election because in some ways what was on the ballot was more of a globalist worldview versus more of a nationalist worldview, and the nationalist worldview won. If you go across the world and you look at the elections, there is a trend of the incumbency is losing. And I think the dominant narrative of the last 10 or 15, 20 years has been globalism. And you're just seeing people push back against that. Right or wrong, that's what's happening. I was on a plane to China with crappy airline Wi Fi, watching and trying to keep track, which, by the way, shout out to Polymarket, shout out to the betters, right? Like the betters nailed this thing. And it's funny, my brother and I were on it, we had different predictions about what would happen in the election. And I told him, like, hey, the betting markets are pretty freaking smart. Somebody knows something. And sure enough, somebody did know something. They got every state right. That the prediction Polymarket had as of October 20th or 23rd, I think they had every single state right the way that it actually fell. But so I'm watching things unfold, and it becomes obvious that Trump is going to win. And immediately you start thinking about, okay, well, what are the ramifications? He is clearly going to incentivize domestic production in any way that he can. He has talked quite a bit about tariffs, and has a history of actually implementing tariffs. So when we landed in China, we got dinner the first night. The next morning, we met with our primary manufacturer, and they had a massive slideshow that was all about their expansion. The owner had just gotten back from Thailand. They're developing another factory there. So let me start by saying this: where things get made is probably the dominant narrative, and that's where the battleground is. The incoming administration is greatly going to want to move to things being made here as opposed to being imported here. And the question in my mind, having had a lot of conversations overseas just in the last week, is when it comes to tariffs, will they be blanket tariffs? Will we hit all categories, or will they be more kind of targeted on certain categories? Chips, defense, pharmaceuticals, things like that. And then secondly, will they be geographically targeted or will they be blanket? So will it be, hey, we're tariffing just these goods from just China, or are we just tariffing these kind of across the board on any country other than the United States? Because what you're seeing a lot of the Chinese manufacturers do, and I mean a lot of them, is they are they were responding to the potential of a Trump presidency, now the inevitability, by moving their production to other places in the Eastern hemisphere that are kind of in China's sphere of influence, a place like Taiwan, a place like Cambodia, whatever. And it's not clear to me whether or not that's going to avoid what's coming. So those are the big questions. Is the Are the tariffs targeted at categories, and are the tariffs targeted at countries, or are they just more blanket, almost everything, almost everywhere? And that'll determine, I think, the way that the world starts to shift and shape.
Sean, you had a tweet, I think even this morning or last night or it was recently, saying like brands want to manufacture domestically, but it's just too damn hard, right? Like we lack definition around what made in America means. Commercial real estate, I think you hit on, or industrial real estate, like it's just too expensive. In this, with what Mike's saying, right? I'm curious to get both of your thoughts on this. Like, how much should your average brand be thinking about this now? Should they be taking any action? Like, how what's the risk level, like 1 to 10, for the average? Like maybe Sean go first. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So this is just like AI, where like brands like throw their hands up, like trying to be like, oh, how do we be on the cutting edge? When you're the person buying picks and shovels. Like you're not the picks and shovel salesman. You're gonna wait for that infrastructure to be built out until it trickles down to you. Um, you're not going to be on the cutting edge of putting in AI agents into your business because that's not your business. Your business is selling widgets off of meta ads, right? And it's the same thing where for most brands, 99% of brands, you're going to manufacture with the person who's willing to take your business, right? Like who already does it, who is specialized in it and has capacity. And if that is a factory in China, because China's made it really easy, or if that factory moves to Thailand or wherever else, you don't really have the money resources to do it a different way. And Mike's totally right. Every factory I've ever talked to in China right now is like, "Don't worry, we're gonna open stuff up in Indonesia. We're gonna open stuff up in Vietnam." And when you factor in they don't know how to do business in those countries. Like, that is
Yeah.
like, it's and then when you factor in that they're gonna buy their stuff from China and then import it to Indonesia and pay tariffs and more lead times, it's just gonna get harder and harder to do business. That is actually where the advantages of overseas manufacturing really starts to slip away slowly over time. Like, they're doing it because they think they have to stay competitive, but it is chicken with your head cut off, people just running around. Now, let's talk about US manufacturing for a little bit. I put out a tweet in the middle of the night before this podcast. Yes, remove ethical concerns, remove nationality
Yep.
as a concern. It would be way easier to make your shit local because you don't have to fly across an ocean and get visas to make your stuff. There's no language barriers to make your stuff. There isn't, supply chain and sea freighting and all the logistics pain in the ass that comes with it, importing whatever. If you could just make the stuff here, it would be easier. So we would all like to do that. We would like to do the easier thing, right? You, it's hard to make stuff in America. The first thing I bring up is the easiest thing to change. One executive order could change this. Give us better definitions of what made in America is. I'm
Yeah.
scared of this. Maybe it's an irrational fear, right? But the government sued Shinola and cost them like $100 million.
Oh, I remember that.
Like, Shinola's like, yeah, we're making the watches in America. They're like, no, you're assembling them in America. We're going to sue you now. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ. They're
What a
trying.
stupid.
Like, you're going to punish us for trying to do the right thing. So just give us clear guidelines like Switzerland has. 60% of value has to be made in America. Easy. We can get that done. I can math that out. That's the first thing, right? The second thing is we got to fix commercial real estate in America. We are over retailed and under industrialized. So what that means is that there's a ton
Nobody
of
wants more industrial space. All the
Yeah.
any urban space, any city, they completely shun it. This Chris Powers has made an entire business off of investing on this thesis that
Yep.
urban areas will do everything they can to reduce how much industrial space there is.
yeah. So we should really explain this for everybody listening. I mean, your operators, you guys know our audience is the highest IQ audience out there, right? But drive through any part of America and you will see empty for lease commercial real estate, right? If
Yep.
you buy that and you try to get power hooked up and you put a CNC machine, they will shut you down. We are over retailed, under industrialized, right? And
Well, and this
I
isn't just it's worth saying, this isn't just on the commercial industrial thing. We've got people that are actively fighting any type of building of like the NIMBY stuff has absolutely murdered so many of these liberal states. I mean, this is one of the dominant themes is like people are fleeing these places where you can't build housing and so housing is just insanely prohibitively expensive. We've got a building problem in this country. Like, I mean, I think you're right. It's definitely true in industrial, but there's just a more general, like, we've let people throw their bodies in front of being a building country. And we
Yeah.
have got to freaking put an end to that. And I hope that's my hope is that we're at the beginning of ending that.
oh yeah.
It is the power thing is actually it's fun. I'm dealing with this right now. We're expanding our facility here by a third, like adding a third of capacity space. Getting power is the issue. Like we literally we have big ass machines. Like we need electricity. And I'm in a commercial industrial zone and it's still hard to get the power.
Yeah, so we have a very small facility in the grand scheme of things in Arizona. It's 10,000 square feet or whatever, right? And with that, you get a certain amount of commercial power in the building. And we had 2 units of commercial power, and the people next door took over one of the units. And so when we bought it, because it was abandoned or whatever, we had to like put all this money into it and get like the city to switch it over. And it was a fucking fight. They were
Yeah.
like, like everything about it sucks. So
Well, here's what sucks. Anytime you do any kind of upgrading to an industrial space, you have a very high chance of some kind of code gotcha with something totally unrelated that comes up in the process. So you want to put in a new power outlet, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? While we were in here, we noticed your insulation isn't up to current code, and that's going to be $300,000. Oh, your sprinkler system needs an update. That's $250,000. This is exactly what happened to us. It's like when you renovate a house and then all of a sudden they come in and they're like, well, this wiring's going to have to all be ripped out. And like you said, Sean, I mean, some of that is legitimate, but this is the overregulation of America. Like we have become an over. I was on a bullet train going 300 kilometers an hour. They are building a new bullet train that will go 550 kilometers an hour. And we can't build a freaking mile of the thing in California. We spend billions of dollars and we can't build a mile of track. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, look, and yeah. So there's a lot of lunacy, and even removing the actual like, oh yes, we should build more houses, right? Like, there's a lot of like economic concerns about building houses because local governments rely on property tax, right? And they spend more and more money every single time. So if housing prices go down, you now are fucking over local economies. I think housing prices should go down. I think we should build as many houses as humanly possible. And I think a surplus of houses is a benefit to all of humanity. But let's just go
But
back
you
to the
nailed it, Sean. That's not in the interest of a big voting constituency. And they've had total capture over the regulatory agencies, by de facto control over them, and that's shifting. And so I hope you're right. I think affordable housing is the easiest way for good things to happen.
yeah, but let's go back to actually building stuff. So I think we are over retailed, under industrialized, and that's why industrial real estate sells for a premium now. It's selling for as much as retail real
Yeah,
estate,
it's
which makes
stupid. It makes no sense
yeah, we
that
don't
it's
have
on par
fucking
with
windows on
retail.
our building. You know what I mean? Uh, the third thing, and I've been very critical of Apple for this. There is a famous interview where Tim Cook is like, "We can't make iPhones in America." They had at one point $150 billion. Okay, that is 2x the annual budget of the entire state of California. They had more money than governments. Okay, Apple had more cash
Yeah, it would
reserves.
have been like the 13th biggest, economy or some kind of, I don't know, that's probably overstating it, but some kind of insane number, right?
Yeah. So the reason why they do not build iPhones in America is because there was no reason to, right? They can play lip service about how hard it is. No, they are allowed to sell in China because they have factories in China. It's the same deal that Elon Musk has with them. The reason why Meta is not allowed to operate or Google's not allowed to operate is because what jobs are they creating
Yeah,
for the
there's no
Chinese?
benefit. There's no benefit to China, so why is China gonna let them in there?
But China wants to make iPhones. They want to make Teslas. So they're like, yeah, sure, we will let you do that. You can sell in our business. So that is why they do not make them in America and why they make them in China. Now, the Chinese are great at making shit. Don't get me wrong. Like they have the infrastructure built out. They have that shit figured out.
Decades of muscle building. All right, let's take a quick break and we're going to thank our sponsor, Postscript. Okay, here's what I want to talk about. There's been this trend in e-commerce where we're trying to get to like all-in-one solutions. So like SMS, email, everything's in one place. And I think there's a bunch of weird arguments for this. I think this is all BS. Like, I would rather have a solution that is like point built and is great for that one thing. This is why I like Postscript. This is why we use Postscript. They do SMS, they do it really freaking well. Right. And I hate to say I told you so, but a lot of brands have gone to like the all in one thing to try to integrate email and SMS, and they've just moved back. And they do it for a bunch of reasons. Oh, it's easier for attribution. It's easier on my marketing team to log into one place. I think that's all BS. Look, the reason we like Postscript is all they think about, they eat and breathe SMS, which means my team is constantly getting access to new features before anybody else. They're actually consulting with us and helping us get better at SMS. I think this like, email and SMS need to be integrated to make SMS more effective is a lie. The reality is most of us aren't sending enough email and most of us aren't sending enough SMS. So trying to like trigger one off the other is likely just a waste of time. And I don't know too many brands personally who can tell me straight faced that this has been a big benefit to them. So in my view and my experience, like the reason we like having Postscript as a sponsor is because we use it and it works really well. And the team is great. Their support's awesome. Their pricing is awesome. So that's my shout out to Postscript. It's wicked to have them as a sponsor for the pod. Let's get back to the show.
Did you see the video that I posted on Twitter, the automation video?
No.
So I posted a video of some automation from our primary manufacturer, and guys, it was amazing. Like, here's the first thing, everybody listening, you need to understand this: the
Oh, wow.
future of manufacturing is automated. It is robotics. It is AI. It is machines. It is not going to be about cheap labor. And when we went to China, the last time I went to China was 5 years ago. They were just starting to get into the robot arms and automation and stuff. Didn't really know what they were doing. When I went this time, they were showing us, they were like, okay, what you saw 5 years ago, that was G1. Here's G2. Here's G3. And you can just see the progression. And you can see how over 5 years it's gone from like this new toy that they didn't really know how to use to the video that I posted where just completely fully automated. They're literally starting with a roll of steel and bottles are popping out the other side of it. And one of the things I took away from that, and I will say this, the owner of our manufacturing partner agrees with this, is that the production is going to geographically move eventually because the machines are getting so freaking good and they're getting good really fast. Like China is they're on a curve right now of like it's almost like iPhone updates. It's like every year it's like okay, we got a cheaper, faster, better automated machine. And if that's happening in water bottles, it's happening in several different industries at the same time. So I don't know if it is it 3 years, is it 15 years, but there's going to be a point where you really do see a shift because the machinery is so good it runs itself, and then it's like, well, why not plug it in America? Unless electrical costs are too high or you can't get the real estate affordably, like you'd much rather have it in America than somewhere else. So it's coming for sure.
Yeah. So that is definitely always been the end state. We talk about manufacturing jobs coming back, and I haven't seen Mike's video. I'm gonna watch it. It's gonna be linked in the show notes. But I've been to China a year ago, and I saw our factories are basically fully automated at this point. It's like to make 100,000 ridge walls, you need like 8 guys. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
You need a couple guys to load up the thing. That's what it is. So
Especially with Ridgewell, it's not that complicated a product. Like the vacuum insulated water bottles, that's pretty complicated. There's 20 steps and you gotta, yeah, I mean, you gotta do all kinds of stuff. So I would say relatively for a non-electronics, we have one of the more complicated products, and seeing that they fully automated that is a wake up call.
Oh yeah, I mean, for ridge wallet manufacturing, you basically just need guys to move raw materials in and then move them from different stages. Like that's what's required. So the manufacturing jobs aren't really coming back. People always talk about like labor costs in China. Like one of the quote tweets was from somebody being like, "Oh, we need to get rid of minimum wage." Bro, that's not the issue. What the issue is right now is like what is stopping me from making all of my wallets here tomorrow? One, some of the components I'm gonna have to buy from other places, and like I don't want to get sued. So like my carbon fiber comes from Japan. I'm not going to make carbon fiber. Does that make it not a made in USA wallet? I got to fix that, right? The second piece is going to be commercial real estate. Like I've already spent $2 million on a goddamn building. To get the square footage I need would be like $8 million, where a factory in China is like 800 grand. It's just like so much more affordable. Um, and then the last thing
This
I
is gonna
bring
be a
up.
big boon for states like Oklahoma. The manufacturing facility we're in now, granted, it's gone up since then, but the people we're leasing it from, it's a 200,000 square foot building, and we found out they bought it for like $3 million. And when we told, our friends in China that, they were just they were blown away. So like some of these states that have a lot of land and are not densely populated are going to be winners in this coming, for exactly the reason you're saying, Sean, that people aren't going to be trying to build manufacturing in California. I don't it doesn't make sense. You're going to move towards the center of the country. You're going to move towards the cheap real estate, towards the cheap energy. This is another thing. Oklahoma has a ton of freaking natural gas. There's a lot of Bitcoin farming that's moved to Oklahoma, which I know that seems random, but it's because the cost of energy is low.
Well, yeah, and then you bring up the cost of energy. There's a very famous chart. Maybe we'll find it that like China have very cheap energy. In the grand scheme of things, the U.S. has pretty cheap energy. If you look at the UK,
Dude, go to
Germany,
the Europe. Go to Europe.
yeah,
It's
like
so expensive.
yeah, it's like they're paying 3 to 5 times what the US is making. So there will be a manufacturing boom in the Western Hemisphere soon, right? It is just whenever we decide to buy these robots to make the investments. And if the tariffs get too crazy, it's like yeah, like I will find $5 million. I'm going to move out to the sooner state and figure that shit out, man.
So you said the two things I want to mention. One of our competitors, a big competitor. without I won't kind of directly call them out, said in their earnings call this week, we're going to have 50% of our manufacturing done outside of China by the end of the year. So I looked into that, and what I found is that it's basically the assembling thing you're talking about, Sean. It's like they're shipping all the parts that are kind of pre-made in China, they're shipping them somewhere else and then putting them together. And so I do think that's an interesting question that we're going to find out more about is the future one where there's more assembly in the United States, there's final assembly in the United States, or is it where it's like, hey, if it's not fully made here, if you're not just importing, raw materials or something, we're not going to consider it made in the USA. The other thing that's pretty interesting and compelling is that Trump has talked about moving the corporate tax rate to 15% if you make your product domestically. Now, is that a pipe dream? What percentage of your product needs to be made domestically? There's all kinds of questions like what defines being made domestically. But for somebody like us, okay, well that's $4 or $5 million a year. And if you're getting $4 or $5 million of incentive just to start, right, before you even get to the tariffs, and then tariffs could throw, I don't know, another several $1 million. If you're talking about it's now $7 million, $8 million, $10 million cheaper for us to make things here, all of a sudden, like that is going to tip things. So what's unclear to me is that with the new administration, if this is going to lead to short-term inflation wherever they go after it. Like you can't just throw 50% tariffs and not get inflation. So what we anticipate inside of Simple Modern, but I have no idea if this is how it'll play out, is that it will be more targeted in places like automobiles, chips, food, uh, pharmaceuticals, things that antibiotics that they will like really, really incentivize things that are kind of key to national security in some way or another. That and they will try and avoid consumer products in general because they don't want to create inflation that's really obvious to voters. But we'll see. I have no idea. Maybe they'll rip the band-aid all the way off. Who
Right.
knows?
So, Mike, you said a lot of great things there. One, Trump has a lot of shit. So I also heard income tax is going away, being replaced by tariffs. So you hear a lot of things from this guy. Two, we are at the bottom of the curve. Like that's what it, like if you're a small e-com merchant, just continue to operate as normal. You're gonna have higher cogs. You're gonna have maybe less discretionary income going around. But like, I'm not saying you need to take $5 million and try to build a fully automated factory in Oklahoma. Like, we're so far down that curve. It is going to be the biggest people first, right? It's going to be cars. It's going to be Apple. It's going to be those companies that have unlimited resources. And then when you pair it with the fact that we're also in a power race right now, like everyone's trying to get as much power as possible. So you probably just need to wait it out 3 years, figure out what the fuck, how to make your business better today. US manufacturing will not be the difference between doing $5 and $10 million a year or $10 and $15 million a year. We're talking about big publicly traded companies who sell coolers going, from made in China to assembled in the USA to assembled in the USA with domestic and imported parts, and then eventually the made in the USA thing. So
And here's one other encouragement to everybody who is probably going to be continuing to buy from China. The exchange rate. You want to watch the exchange rate, the USD to RMB exchange rate, and it is back up to 721. It was down as low as 703 on October 1st. It's gone up to 721, and it's probably headed higher. Like the dollar is going to strengthen, which means your goods in China become cheaper. And then the other thing that I would expect is I would expect that costs are going to come down in China. Like if really big tariffs do come, China's going to have to absorb a lot of that. Um, being over there, it's kind of crazy. I was in Shanghai at the end, and in many ways, you look around and you're like, gosh, why is this so much better than any American city? But they've got, the third tallest building in the world. It just looks amazing. But then you notice that a bunch of floors are vacant. And that's China, basically, in a nutshell, where they have been investing so much money into the country, but they cannot get domestic spending where they need to get it. And China cannot afford. It's an existential threat to if you're in a position where you have a lifetime appointment, you cannot afford for your economy to go in the tank because that's the one thing that'll take you out of power. and they just cannot afford to lose the manufacturing. They can't afford it. And so if they have to cut prices, if they have to government subsidize, and I think this is part of the, calculus on the US end is that, listen, if we tell China, hey, there's 40% tariffs, then they're going to have to subsidize it because they can't lose that manufacturing. But I will make one other general point. And this is not a perspective that's only an American perspective. I'll say that. I think that China and the US being active trade partners is a stabilizing force in the world. And if you were to see them become much less active trading partners, I think that would be very destabilizing because then some of each country's impulses are not held in check.
Hmm.
And so that's the big concern, I think, from the Chinese and American perspective right now, is that you have this kind of detente, and there's some things that China could do that would be really detrimental, I think, to the relationship. But I don't think they would ever pull the trigger on those when they're fully dependent on US trade. If the US did something where a ton of manufacturing fled China, then I could see China saying, screw it, we're going to do what we want to do. And that's the real kind of nightmare scenario that I think has people very spooked. So there's a significant amount of concern. I would say, having been on the ground in China for a week, there's a significant amount of concern over there about what's coming next. And I think nobody knows. Everybody's talking about diversifying their supply chain, but like you said, Sean, all these other countries have tons of warts, tons of problems. And so the idea that anybody's going to be able to quickly pivot around this thing is just farcical. I think the thing that's interesting is, what does what's happening over the next, let's call it, year or 2 years, how does that impact the next 10 or 20 years? I do think it's going to have major impacts, but short term, for most people, like you said, they're not going to be able to just move. Like, I'll give you one other example. Let's say in my industry, for example, we've got people that are trying to develop manufacturing in Thailand. And let's just say Thailand doesn't get hit with tariffs, but China does. Right now, Thailand could do like 5% of the world demand, or 2% or something. So it's like the boat's not big enough. Everybody can't just go to Thailand, right? It's like it doesn't work. It'd be a decade probably before Thailand would be spun up to where it could handle all the demand. And so, like, you'll see a rush to the exits if these tariffs come, but there's not enough lifeboats, there's not enough production. So people are going to be stuck in China for a while. If you don't already have domestic manufacturing or plans made, you're probably going to be stuck in China whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, I think you need another reason to build out domestic supply chain than simply China bad. Like that, like, or tariffs bad. Like, that's not like, that's it just sounds reactionary, and it doesn't sound very, like, sort of long term. Like, you're not thinking in terms of strategy or leverage or, you know, um, anything that would be good for the business outside of that's scary, is what I'm hearing.
We absolutely use Northbeam, and me specifically, every day. I'm constantly in there building out reports. And I remember when we brought it on a couple years ago, and I got to meet Austin, who is the founder, and he is fabulous. And he was selling me on the idea of, not using in platform and really using a separate platform as like our source of truth, which is what we needed. And I mean, it has been a deal breaker for us. It's helped us scale in areas and on platforms that we didn't even, weren't getting a good read on. And it's helped us optimize for our channels that we really had a lot of high spend on. And their team is great. My favorite part is taking the calls with them where they, dive deep into the insights, and they've always got really great information for us. So yeah, I love Northbeam. We wouldn't be where we are at today without them.
Okay, so let's go through the scenario. Like, China's already 90% automated when it comes to making water bottles. They're scared of tariffs, so they're like, we're gonna take our robots and move them over to Thailand, and then we're gonna get that 95% automated because these people in Thailand don't know how to make these bottles, and
Yeah.
we'll get more robots to get it done, right? And
Well,
then
China, go ahead, John.
well, then you're still shipping them across the fucking ocean, and you're still getting
Exactly.
raw material from China. The ultimate end goal of this is like, whatever. If the robots are doing it, we're gonna do the robots in Oklahoma, right? Because
Well, unless we forget, what's to say that the tariffs would be just China specific? That's a great way to
Well,
aggravate
I've heard
China.
it, like, I remember reading that it's like, we're talking global tariffs
Yeah, I think
was
I
one
think
of the
that that's It's a nationalist policy. It's not an anti-China policy. It's a nationalist policy. And if you're trying to bring manufacturing home, you're not going to just say, well, we're only tariffing water bottles out of China. You're going to say, hey, if you bring a water bottle in from out of the country, it's 50% tariff. And that's what's most likely to happen. And anyway, the other kind of point here is that manufacturers will prioritize their biggest clients. And so this is another place where it depends on how big you are, how big of a client you are in terms of how you get prioritized in the stack as they're adjusting to things.
For you guys, like, and this is just my own ignorance on the subject, is the bring manufacturing back to America sort of nationalist view, is that more about job creation or is it more about like national security?
I think the smart view is that I think the smart view there's a kind of a plays to the masses view, and then there's a smart view. The plays to the masses view is we're going to go back to when America made a bunch of stuff and everybody had great jobs, and listen, it's most likely going to be freaking Tesla robots running around, fully automated factories. Like that's
Yeah.
probably, I mean, especially with Elon, in there now, like that's the future that I think we've really got coming. But the biggest threat to our country is we are so dependent upon we'll say external inputs and imports from other countries in areas that you simply cannot be. During COVID, we realized, hey, 90% of our antibiotics come from China. So what happens if China is just like, we're not going to ship you antibiotics anymore because we're in some kind of a cold or hot war? Well, I don't know, a bunch of people die, I guess. Right? And the same thing with chips. Why does everybody think Taiwan is such a big deal?
Mm.
Because that's where all the chips are made. Like if Taiwan were to come under the influence of somebody else, that if China were to decide that Taiwan needed to be fully integrated and that they weren't going to share their chips with anybody, that just tanks so many U.S. businesses. And so, I mean, military is a really obvious one. Like we can't have things that the military is using being made by China. We just can't. So anyway, all of these areas, food's another one I've mentioned several times in this podcast, but like you cannot be in a place where you depend upon other governments with which you have a lukewarm to slightly aggressive relationship on things that your society has to have to function. And if we're smart, we're going to adjust that. I'm probably in like the spectrum. I'm more of like a, hey, globalism is good. I think economists aren't all idiots, that it has brought some really good things. But just with I think that this is probably the problem with all political discourse in our country, is that the truth is always nuanced. Like, it's not about, is globalism good or bad? It's, what are the good things of globalism and how do you balance those out? How do you find the
Sure.
right balance between globalism and nationalism? If you lean all the way into globalism, you get to crazy things. Like, we don't have any border. Like, people who apply and go through the legal channels can't get into our country, but if you just show up in Mexico, you can. Where we're doing insane things, and trade secrets and national security are compromised. But and if you go to the other end where it's like, hey, it's America versus the world, that's going to go really badly also. But we've got to find a way to talk in nuance where we can say, hey, let's take the good stuff, and then the stuff that isn't good about globalism, let's take more of a nationalist policy on those things. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know if I'm optimistic that'll happen in the next 4 years, but hopefully that's what we'll figure out over the next 10 or 20.
Right. And Mike, this isn't the China fear podcast, right? Like you and I both have really good relationships in
No.
China. I love going there. One of the best places to ever go. It's so sick.
I will say this, I deeply admire what China's done.
Yeah.
If you do not admire what China's done, go there. And you will be amazed. The way they've transformed their country over like just a couple decades, it is awe-inspiring. And in so many ways, you're like, they are a culture of builders, and we are a culture that has not been building. And we've been coasting off of kind of the victories of decades gone by. And so I highly admire China. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, there was so much fear, is that they just want to build. They
Dude,
just
our
want to
team in
build.
China, our we have a team in Hong Kong, just because we make technology, right? So it's like chips and firmware and hardware, like all that stuff. They are like the work ethic and the drive is
Oh yeah.
so admirable. It really blows me away. It reminds me of like watching my dad and his friends work in the like when I was a kid in the 80s. It's just what they like to do. They like to make things. They like to build, and they're super resourceful. So this definitely not the like hate on China thing. Not at all. I hope nobody gets that impression from this show. Like not at all.
Yeah, look, and if you want to talk about like positive ethics, in the 80s, in the 90s, there was tens, if not hundreds of millions of people starving to death in China, right?
Right.
Like their embrace of capitalism is one of the best moral things that has ever happened. Like China's rise to power and it like, rubbing shoulders with us and like, becoming somewhat of a political enemy. It is those things are all bad. We have to remember that when you guys were 15 and 20, people were dying because they didn't get enough food in China.
Yes.
So it's a moral good that they've risen up. They will find their place in the world just like Japan did, just like Korea did, just like Russia tried to in the 90s. Um, but going back to like what does the future look like? And Matt, you asked the question: is this military? Like what is this? Is this
Yeah, is this security or is this about jobs? Like what are we actually looking at? I think Mike had a great like, it's like there's the perception of it, jobs, and then there's the behind the scenes thing, which is like it's much more nuanced. So, Sean, I'm curious your position on this.
Yeah, look, and I've had the pleasure of meeting JD Vance, and I'm from a part of the world that's a lot like where he grew up. I knew kids who died of heroin overdoses and like fentanyl and like manufacturing Rust
Yep.
Belt towns, like the same, all that different type of shit. Um, that part of it doesn't surprise me that he won, and him and Trump won the Rust Belt so heavy-handedly because
Yeah.
there are a lot of people there who are mad, right? And like I always think back to like 2015 when they were closing coal plants in West Virginia and journalists were like learn to code, right? And like it is such an inhuman response to people who've worked their fucking asses off to make this country work. And then it's like, oh, whatever, learn to code. And then the journalists got laid off in the past 4 years. There's been a massive, like dearth of journalist jobs. And I don't hate journalists. I love reading papers and shit, right? But it's like the disrespect towards like the working class. And like, dude, going back to politics, bro, I voted for Bernie. You know what I mean? Like I am like a total working class person. But I get the like there's a reason why JD Vance will probably be the president in fucking 4 years. And it's because he speaks to that part of the country that really matters, the people who are working their fucking asses off, right?
I'll say
Anyway,
this, Vance is smart, man. Vance is actually probably my biggest optimism from this,
Yeah.
this election cycle is when you hear him talk, he's obviously thoughtful. He reads the research. He's not just going off of his gut. And as you said, Sean, he grew up and experienced the difficulty of poverty and addiction and the different things that unfortunately have hollowed out a lot of this country. It's understandable why some people are mad and why some people were fed up in this election.
dude, and like even removing like just trying to make this as analytical as possible, you totally get why he wins Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, places that make shit. And New York was within 8%. It's like it was New York is now officially a purple state. New Jersey's a purple state. It's because there's people in those markets who have Rust Belt jobs, right? Like upstate New York is people who work in fucking steel mills and they've just been told for 8 years that they're bad or whatever and they're polluting and like we're going to take these fucking jobs away and you're going to learn to code. And you get how those people get mad. And if you're just an analytical approach, those are the markets that determine who the president is. You have
So
to repeal.
I'll give like a take. I don't think I've synthesized it quite like this, but I think it's this simple. I think in America, I think the cultural issues started to take precedence over the economy
Hmm.
in the ruling party, and that was the end. The moment you start saying our ideologies about equity are going to force you to hire in a certain way or to not build these things and introduce all this red tape, at that point it was probably over for the Democrats because in this country people will vote based on their wallet. That has always been proven to be true. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, we become a nation that in large part disincentivizes builders. This is my optimism about Elon being involved. Elon is maybe the defining builder of this generation. and America can be great. One of my favorite stories from World War II, Japan, before they bombed Pearl Harbor, they plotted the whole thing out. They said, all right, if we go after the United States, then what we have to immediately do is spread ourselves out in the Pacific, basically fortify all these small islands, make it really time consuming, and then more or less make the United States kind of come to the table and negotiate some kind of a peace that's favorable for us. This was their plan all along. They never thought they would beat the United States in a war. It was just, hey, maybe we can hit them first. And as part of this plan, they had a team of economists that looked at the United States and basically created projections of how many warships, battleships, aircraft carriers that the United States could make per year when the war machine got spun up. Because they knew, if you hit Pearl Harbor, they're going to spin up the war machine. And I don't remember the numbers, but I remember that they came out with a range of projections, and the high end of the range of their projections by 1945, we were doing 5x the high end of their projections, or 10x. It was some kind of insane thing that even their most optimistic scenarios of what the United States could turn into from a manufacturing perspective was woefully short of what we got to, which is one of the reasons why their strategy didn't work. And so if you want optimism from this episode, it's that when you incentivize Americans to build, they're awesome at it. And hopefully that's what we're entering into, is an era of building in this country. I don't care nearly. I mean, if you're in business, I don't care nearly as much about the social issues as I do that we're a country of builders. And I think that that is where we're headed. And I think that this election was largely a rejection of putting other things, other kind of quasi-religious political beliefs ahead of that.
Matt, do you want the final word on the podcast?
I think this is going to be great for consumer. I think the tariffs are tricky. I think short term there's going to be pain. I don't think brands of any size that probably listen to this show should be reactive around supply chain. I don't. I think Sean nailed it. I think this is a wait and see period. But like, I'm bullish, man. I think consumer is going to be in a great spot over the next 4 years. Like I like where I landed was put all that other shit aside. Net. I'm happy I make physical things. And I think this is going to be a good time to be making and shipping physical things.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say, the guy who won our sweepstakes, his name's Jacob. He's a logger up in Wisconsin. So he's also in the military. His wife's in the military. He had his own logging company, and now he delivers milk. He picks up milk from Amish people, like a big giant milk truck, and he drives it to like processing plants or whatever.
Huh.
And I don't think most people who talk about the election or politics have ever talked to a guy like Jacob. Like,
No.
small town. He's from Independence, Wisconsin. The guy talks to Amish people all day. He drives a truck. He's in the military. And like, I really wish more pollsters, more like Nate Silver, like, you got to respect the work that guy does. He should just talk to people like Jacob. Jacob's 22, just got married. And like, that guy is going to be the electorate that decides the president for the next 20 years, right?
Yeah, it's not the your average CNN viewer. It's the average person that doesn't have time to
No.
spend a bunch of their free time thinking about politics. They're just like, oh, it's election time, I got to vote. It's kind of like they showed Google searches for is Joe Biden still in the race spiked on election day. But
What I think we should do, guys, I think I would love to do an episode entirely on culture in America. Like just consumer culture and like every state is so different. And I don't know who we can bring on to talk about this, but I think like as a brand selling products to the consumer, what Sean just said is so insightful, right? Like there are so many groups and subcultures and veins of human beings, and what drives them to vote or act or shop or do anything. Like as a brand builder, that is a worthy subject to dig into.
Hell yeah. You made it. An amazing episode of the Operators Podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the newsletter. Thank you to fulfill the best sponsor on earth, Northbeam, Postscript. They're tied for 2 of the best sponsors on earth. Love them. Love what they do for us. Thank you for being here. Subscribe, like, share. Follow me on Twitter. Follow the other guys on Twitter. Talk to you later. Goodbye.